Hi. My name is James Lee, as the great introduction said, but my real name is Egypt. I've been working on the Metasploit project, which I'm sure many of you know is an open source offensive security toolkit. And I've been working on it for quite some time. I started contributing patches in 2007. I got commit access in 2008. I started working for Rapid7 when the acquisition happened in 2009. So I've been doing it for a little while. Before that, I was a security researcher. I was a web developer. I did some internal security sort of things. And briefly, I was a pen tester for a little while. So I hope that gives you a little bit of indication of where I'm coming from and why I think these things are important. And I hope that it'll give you a place where I'm coming from so you can meet me in the middle. What I'm going to be talking about today are the goals, the motivations, the difficulties, and some of the solutions for open source and for security, and the amalgamation of the two, that overlap that is so important. Open source and InfoSec are related, of course, but they're also very different. And most of what I'm going to be talking about today is sort of a compare and contrast exercise, putting them together and seeing what is similar, what is different, and how we can work together to make both of them better. So a lot of this spawned in part because of this tweet from Josh Corman, a friend of mine, who laid out some of the motivations for white hat security people. And I think it generalizes a little bit further than that. It's not just white hats. It's most people working in security on either side of the fence. It's also, this covers a lot of the motivations for open source people as well. And I'll list them here: protect, puzzle, prestige, profit, and protest. And I'll come back to each of these individually. So first, I want to talk about open source software. Now, there are several goals of open source, beginning with producing high-quality programs. So the very first part, and perhaps the most obvious goal of writing code, is to create good software. Right? What's the point of writing code if you're not producing something that can be used? Right? It's the same as production software as well. Everyone wants the thing they produce to be good. You want it to be useful. You want it to solve the problem. If you're a user, you want the software you use to solve that problem too, whatever the problem is. In our case, we're talking about security, but in general, you want your software to do the thing, whatever the thing is. So as a core tenet of open source, one of its most important goals is to solve the problem. Next is to share work. Right? That's why open source started, is so that we could share work, because the best code is code that I didn't have to write. You know, it's work. I have to put in effort, and it's much better if someone else does that and I can use their effort. So we want the thing to solve the problem, but if the problem is already solved, if someone is already putting the effort to fix it, then that's way better because we can use their work as well. There's always going to be more interesting problems, more shiny things to chase. So if you are working on something that has already been solved, you're not spending time on new problems, on the new shiny, on the new thing that interests you. So the cycle continues. You use open source software, you contribute to open source software, and the next person comes along and they can start where you left off. The cycle continues. It overall increases the body of humanity's knowledge by producing open source software. We're lifting everyone up by standing on the shoulders of those who have come before us. And that leads directly to the next thing: democratize code. Anyone can contribute because all users are potential co-contributors. And as developers, we need to nurture that. Now, the original goals of open source movement began with the idea of a meritocracy. And for anyone not familiar with the concept, it goes like this: no one should ever care what you look like or where you come from. The only thing that matters in open source is whether the code works. It doesn't matter if you're black or white or gay or straight. It just matters that your code works, right? So, of course, meritocracy is a little troublesome because it turns out that humans are deeply subconsciously biased in all kinds of ways. So meritocracy isn't perfect, of course, like anything, but the idea is really appealing. The goal of having this meritocracy where everyone is judged solely on the production of code, that's really appealing. People should succeed on the strength of their programming ability, not on their skin color or any other irrelevant nonsense like that. And like I said, humans kind of suck at that, but at least the goal is worthwhile. So why do people work in open source? These motivations, I think, are really important. And a lot of the reasons that Josh mentioned for InfoSec overlap very well with open source. It's not perfect, but I want to cover the ones that I think are most important. First is puzzle. Now this is all about the challenge of solving the problem. I talked about fixing the problem or solving the thing, whatever that happens to be. Puzzle is the challenge of it, the difficulty, the intrigue of chasing that shiny thing, getting to where you're going through code. And it fits in the overall category of programming in general. It's not really specific to open source, but it's really important to open source. Most people who work in open source do so at least in part because of this challenge, because of the fun of interacting with some system and learning it inside and out. You do it long enough and you see that solving problems is addictive. You spend all day staring at code. You look at the inputs trying to figure out what the output is supposed to be, why it isn't what you expect. You debug all day long. And you stop seeing the code and you see the matrix and you're like, whoa, I know C. And it's addictive. It feels really good. And you just want to solve the puzzle, right? And this is Shaggy. He knows how to solve the puzzle, but he can't talk. And he wants to help. All he wants to do is help. The next thing is prestige. So learning is really important for a lot of people, but getting your name out there is important too. Getting your name on an important large security project can be, or any open source project, can be a pretty big resume builder, right? Hiring managers use open source software too. They use that same code, and if they see your name on a commit for some big project that everyone uses, that's a really good indicator that someone else has decided you're good. If you have put in some effort that other people have taken into their own open source projects, that's a big signal that the person running that project, the person who landed your pull request or whatever, they think your code is good. So people hire based solely on the strength of open source. But that's not what it's all about. There are some psychological aspects here too. And people want to be recognized for their work. People need validation. We thrive on it. As human beings, being told that what we've done is good is really empowering. It feels great to hear that, and especially from people you respect. If you look up to someone based on the strength of their work, and they tell you that they respect your work too, that feels amazing, right? Everyone has had that experience where you look at someone else's work and you think, man, that's beautiful. That is really well done, right? When someone else tells you the same thing about your code, that is addictive too. It feels really good. And next is profit. And I don't mean getting independently wealthy. By profit, I really mean making a living. It's quite rare for someone to actually become independently wealthy through writing open source software. In fact, I've never heard of anybody who ever has done so. But lots of folks, including me, do get paid for writing open source software. And that can be as a direct work product, where Things like the Linux kernel has several developers who are paid full-time only to work on the Linux kernel, and that is their job. Or being paid for open source can take the form of tooling that supports your direct work function. So an example there is the way I got started in Metasploit. I was working on writing exploits for my day job, and I would run into problems with Metasploit, so I would fix the bug. Or there was some feature that was missing, or an API that wasn't as clear as I needed it to be, and so I would fix it to suit my purposes to support my day job. So I wasn't being paid to write open source, but I was being paid to do a thing that open source helped, and therefore I was being paid to write open source. So those two things really are why a lot of open source exists, because people don't have tons of free time in general. Being paid, getting a paycheck, makes it possible. And when I was a kid, my dad told me that the secret to success is finding something you love enough that you would do it for free, and then getting someone to pay you for it. Not everyone has that opportunity. Not everyone can get to that point. I feel like I have. I definitely have. I contributed to Metasploit because I loved it, because I loved the project. It helped me in my work, yes, but I agree with the philosophy of it, and I love that it exists, and I want it to be better. And that's why I do it. That's why a lot of people who work in open source do it. But I couldn't have done it without the money. Right? People. Josh didn't mention this one, but I think it's especially important for open source. People want to work with good people. We all want to be part of a community. It's human nature to want to belong. The corollary here is people don't want to work with jerks. People want to work with people that they like. They want to build relationships with the folks that they work with. You want to be friends with your coworkers. If your friends are jerks, nobody wants to hang out with them, right? Some of this ties back to prestige. Again, not fame and fortune and going on CNN, not that kind of fame, but the prestige of having the respect of your coworkers and your colleagues. And knowing those people, knowing that they're smart people and that they also look up to you, is incredible validation. These are the people whose validation you seek. Difficulties of open source. So those are some of the motivations. In open source, especially as a small project just getting started, getting users is the most important thing. If you don't have any users, then you'll never have any contributors, and your project will wither on the vine, right? You absolutely have to have users to get started. With a larger, more established project, getting those users is less of an issue because your name is well known, people already use you and recommend you to their friends. But it's still super important because if you don't have a constant influx of new users, you don't have new contributors. And the statistic that I've seen several times now in multiple different studies is that people work on open source for roughly 3 years on any given project. Sometimes less, sometimes more on any particular person, but people don't work on the same project forever. You get the use of your project that you're working on for the thing that you need it for, and then you move on. I no longer write exploits as my day job. Now I'm writing things to support other people writing exploits. I no longer contribute to some of the projects that I did back when I needed them. Now I no longer need them, so I don't contribute. And that's true across the board, regardless of the industry. Basically, everyone who works on open source has sort of a half-life. So to keep the project healthy, you have to have new users coming in. You have to have new contributors coming out of that pool. Then contributors, like I said, come from that pool of users. and I mentioned before that every user is a potential co-contributor, someone who's going to work on the project with you. But you need all of them. And in effect, this last point here, having users and contributors. Getting users and contributors is hard to get started. Once you get started, once you get going, now you've got users and you've got contributors, and that in itself is sometimes a difficulty. Because people can be mean, they can be jerks, they can be all kinds of difficult things. But your users are very much like customers. You don't want to piss them off because then they'll stop buying your product. Just like customers, they can be demanding, they can be rude, they can be annoying, they can be incompetent, and their needs are not necessarily your own. They're trying to solve the problem for their work, not for you. So you have to balance that, and it's not always easy. One of the hardest things, at least for me, for being a maintainer of a large open source project, is balancing those conflicting tasks. We have to make new contributors feel welcome on the one hand, and we have to maintain the high standards of the project on the other hand. And I don't mean that to imply that contributors write bad code. That's not what I mean at all. What I mean is that folks who are less familiar with a code base, who haven't been working on it forever. I've been working on Metasploit for most of a decade now. I know a lot about it. Someone who comes in new, has never seen it before, they have completely different biases. They have different things that they know. That doesn't mean they're dumb. It means that their body of knowledge is a slightly overlapping Venn diagram with my own. But necessarily, because of that, they're going to miss things. They're not going to know the right API. They're going to make style mistakes because they're not familiar with Ruby, or whatever the case is. So contributors need a little hand-holding. And even veterans make mistakes. I still break the master branch on a pretty regular basis. We can't expect rookies to be perfect. So to maintain those high standards, a big thing that really helps is automated testing and enforced code review. Having those two things helps a ton, because then it solves two problems. With automated testing, one, you get immediate feedback. Someone submits a pull request, the automated testing kicks off, it breaks something, the contributor sees immediately that something is broken and that they need to do something about it. Please don't go away. Whew. So that helps a lot. And the second reason why that's important is then the tests are the enemy, right? I'm not telling you that your code's broken. The tests are telling you that the code is broken, right? And we can work together to fight that common enemy and fix the bugs, right? But the downside is still that someone is telling you your baby is ugly. But contributors have to put forth a lot of effort to give you their code. They had to figure out the development environment, they had to make the changes, they had to get on GitHub, make an account, figure out how to upload that code, make a pull request. It's a lot of work. If you've never done it before especially, it's a lot of work. And if you want people to keep giving you code, you have to help them. You have to lift them up. You have to nurture them. You have to be nice to them. A friend of mine recently coined the phrase, users are life, life is pain. Some of that comes from the best movie of all time, The Princess Bride, where life is pain, princess. Anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. It's absolutely true. And I hesitated to put this here to say that users are painful because I don't want to alienate users. I don't want people to think that I don't respect them or don't want them around or that I find them to be a burden. And that is not what I mean. But what I mean is that they require work. Users are the life of your project. They can be a big help, but they require work. They will give you work in return. If you nurture them, you bring them up, they will help you with your project, and they will find things that you never would have found. They will have time to do the new feature that you never would have had time to do. So they do bring pain, but they make up for it, and they are absolutely worth it. So now I want to talk about security and how all of that comes back together. Now, as security practitioners, these are sort of the main things. This is not everything in security, of course. I've tried to distill it down into just a few bullet points, but these, I think, are a decent summary of what security means altogether. Right? The heart of our work is risk. We have to identify those risks, find out what the problems are. We have to quantify, put a number on it so that things can be prioritized. We have to decide what needs to get worked on right now and what can wait until after those things are done. Ultimately, we're here to mitigate. Right? We're supposed to fix the problem. If you don't fix the problem, then what are we doing? Why are we here? And lastly, there's reporting. And this doesn't always mean a direct formal report where you're writing in a Word doc and sending it off. Sometimes it just means calling the CISO and saying, hey, this is what happened. You know? All of that requires relationships. Regardless of who you are and how you report or what you report to whom, you need to be able to talk to those decision makers. And if it's an adversarial relationship, then things are not going to get fixed. If you're a pen tester and your client thinks of you as someone coming in and ruining their day, that pen test probably won't be the best. Likewise, if you're an administrator and you're IT or you're a security person and your IT people think of you as those guys who come in and wreck my stuff all the time, right? If that is your relationship, it's going to be very hard to fix things. It's going to be tough. But we can work to make the problem the shared enemy. And if there's anything you take away from this talk today, it's that. Make the problem your shared enemy. Don't become an adversary with the decision makers. Don't fight them. Don't tell them they're stupid for not fixing a thing. Build a relationship. Make that thing the common enemy. Work together to solve the problem. But why do people work in InfoSec? These are the 5 Ps that Josh suggested. And he says he majors in Protect and minors in Puzzle. I'd say if I had to choose, I major in Puzzle. We'll talk more about Puzzle in a second. But Protect, I feel like, is probably the most common motivation for most people in InfoSec. Like, I would suspect that more than half of you in this room are primarily motivated by the idea of fixing things, of making the world a better place, protecting the users, protecting the network, protecting the data. You're here because you want to fix things. You want to make the world a better place. When your non-technical friends hear the word hacker, a lot of them think of those evil bastards who steal credit cards and ruin lives. And I go in no small part to conferences like this to meet more people who want to work with me and be my friend to smash that stereotype. That is not what hacker means. We're here to show them what it really means. It means breaking things often gives you more freedom. It gives you more flexibility. It gives you more power. Knowing how things are broken and how to break them is the only way that we can learn how to fix them. It's the only way that we can keep this whole house of cards that is the InfoSec industry standing up. Right? We have to know how to break things in order to fix them. And it's important to fix them, right? Because he even offered to clean it up. 11 out of 10, such a heckin' good boy. Next is puzzle, and I said this is probably my major motivation. It's also pretty big in the InfoSec industry, and when I ask my friends whether they do reverse engineering or penetration testing or exploit development or incident response or any of the myriad sub-disciplines within InfoSec, chances are pretty good that they got involved in the industry because it was fun, right? Popping boxes is fun. Everyone who's ever written an exploit knows that feeling, right? You spend all day staring at a debugger and you finally get that offset. You find the right thing. You find the ROP gadget that you're looking for. You get past the mitigation, whatever it is. You bypass the filter and your SQL injection goes through and it hits and it lands and you get that rush. It's just, right? It feels so damn good. You take the work that you've been doing and you turn it into a tangible result, and it's beautiful. It's beautiful. That's exactly why I got into InfoSec. Because I love shells. I love popping boxes. It's really good times. Next, I mentioned fame before, the prestige aspect here. It's not a major one for everybody, but I'm not going to lie, if prestige didn't matter, I wouldn't be here. Right? I wouldn't stand up on a stage and yammer about my opinions on all this stuff. Personally, I enjoy presenting. I like getting up here and doing this sort of thing. But it's not the only means of fame. There's other things too, like getting your name on a CVE. Feels really good. There's another aspect of that validation, right? You found an O-Day. You got your name on a CVE, and you have increased the body of human knowledge all by yourself. Like that feels good, right? But all of these advantages of the prestige in open source apply in InfoSec as well, right? You can get jobs based on the fact that you have your name on a CVE, right? And it also has disadvantages. There are definitely downsides to prestige. And an example is I'll never remember all of your names, and I'm sorry. But that just comes with the territory. If you get up in front of a lot of people and you meet everyone at a conference, there's no way you're going to remember everyone. And sometimes that's just the best we can do. But part of the point is to make those meetings, to shake those hands and meet new friends. Going back to my dad, he used to say that a stranger is just a friend I haven't met yet. That's absolutely how I look at it. And preferably, I want to meet smart friends. I want my friends to be smart so I can learn from them. Because in general, I get all of my best ideas by stealing them from movies. Profit, I think, is the same. For InfoSec people, you gotta have that paycheck, right? Regardless of whatever else you do in your life, if you're worried about making the rent, then you're not solving the problem. You're solving your rent, because that's much more important, right? So getting paid is an integral motivation for a lot of people, whether you think about it or not. It might be a subconscious motivation, might be something that you don't necessarily think of all the time, but it's certainly there. Protest. This one was missing from open source, but I think it's probably a lot more important in InfoSec. The people I know for whom protest and politics are a defining motivator, most of them don't want it to be. They didn't mean for it to be. That's not how they got started. It got thrust upon them by circumstance. How many of you have heard of Wassenaar, the Wassenaar arrangement? Show of hands. Wow, surprisingly not that many. All right, so if you're not familiar, the Wassenaar arrangement was an international treaty concerning the export of arms, of weapons. The point was to make the sale of tanks and jet fighters and small arms and cannons and all that sort of crap, to make it more difficult to export, to make it more transparent, so everyone knows where all those tanks are going, know who's selling guns to whom. But the Wassenaar arrangement has a section on computers. And that section can be interpreted to mean that basically anything having the potential to be used in an offensive way can be, in terms of computer software, can be considered munitions for the purposes of export control. So that directly affects me. Metasploit can potentially be regulated under this rule. Now, it's an international treaty. That means that the participating states have to enact legislation locally that supports the arrangement. So I have several friends who are working to talk with the legislators and try to make sure that when those laws get passed to implement the Wassenaar arrangement, that they don't screw us completely, right? Because that would be really, really terrible if having anything with an offensive capability suddenly became illegal. How would you test your things, right? And crossing international lines with those tools could suddenly become a federal capital offense. That could be really, really dangerous. So, like I said, politics is not typically a motivating factor for most people at the start. It gets thrust upon them. My friends who are working on this are working on it sort of in desperation, because this sort of thing could be really terrible. So then we have difficulties of security in general. There are a couple of different places where this comes into play. Pen testers and administrators have a lot of things in common, developers as well, but a lot of things that aren't quite so common. As a pen tester, your product, the thing that you sell, is your report. It's that piece of paper at the end describing what you did. It is not your expertise. It is not your experience. It is not your elite skills. It is not the number of shells you popped over the course of an engagement. The thing you are selling is your report, which means that you have to be able to communicate. You have to be able to talk to people, tell them about the problem, help them understand why it's a problem, and help them fix it. All of that has to be communicated in writing. And when you write this report, it's also going to basically describe the places where the administrator fell down, the places where they failed. This thing isn't patched. That thing is out of date. This had a default password. All of those things are failures. There are things that should have been fixed before they went to production, right? But they weren't. So you're telling them again that their baby is ugly. And you have to find a way to soften that blow. You have to make the problem the common enemy. Don't be the enemy, because then nothing will get fixed. Make the problem the enemy and work together to fix it. And like I said, most administrators don't have a formal reporting sort of system, but again, you're talking to the CISO. And when things really go pear-shaped, sometimes you're saying things like, this is how much money it's going to cost us. This is how much we lost due to that breach. And that sounds very much like, man, that baby's ugly. Man, that baby's ugly. I'll just let you sit on that one for a second. Ugh. So then we get to the overlap, open source security. I've mentioned Metasploit throughout this. That's where I come from. I'm personally coming at all of this from an offensive point of view, because that's where my interests lie. That's where I've always been drawn to InfoSec, is through offense. I believe that the things I'm talking about are fairly universal, but someone working on a defensive tool might have a completely different point of view on how all of this stuff fits together. So take it with somewhat of a grain of salt. When I talked about open source in general earlier, I mentioned democratizing code. And democratizing vulnerability information and exploits is fairly similar. By making exploits public and making them open source, we diffuse their power. Exploits are powerful. And if we give them to everybody, we're spreading that power across everybody. Everyone is on even footing, and it lowers the barrier to entry for anyone who wants to learn how an individual exploit works or how exploits in general work. It gives everyone the ability to test and verify their defenses. By having all of the same exploits as the bad guys, you too can run those exploits and see what they look like. You can examine what they look like on the wire, what symptoms manifest on target systems, and by spreading that out, by giving it to everyone, we're removing the power from those who would keep it to themselves. This also brings us back to the idea of a meritocracy, right? Because if everyone has it and everyone uses it for good, then the people who would use it for bad lose their power. This year, 2016, marks the 30th anniversary of the publication of The Conscience of a Hacker, better known as the Hacker Manifesto. It is a document that still inspires me today. It is one of the reasons why I got involved, because it is a very heartfelt document that explains a lot of people's motivations. I'd like to quote from it just briefly. "We explore, and you call us criminals. We seek after knowledge, and you call us criminals. We exist without skin color, without nationality, without religious bias, and you call us criminals. You build atomic bombs, you wage wars, you murder and cheat and lie to us, and try to make us believe it's for our own good, yet we're the criminals. Yes, I am a criminal. My crime is that of curiosity. My crime is that of judging people by what they say and think, not what they look like." "30 years ago that was written. Still absolutely applies today. And every time I hear it, I get emotional. It's everything that brings me to InfoSec. So as people who produce open source security software, we also have our own difficulties. Most people who come with code for open source security projects in particular are not developers. Their main day job is not programming. Most of the people who submit pull requests to Metasploit in particular are penetration testers. They're solving the problem. They're scratching that itch that only they can solve. They found this system on a pen test that he'd never seen before and needed an exploit for, so they wrote it. Usually, a pen test is only a week long, right? So you don't have a whole lot of time to test that. We have to nurture these people, make them better developers, help them improve so that they can help us improve. Now here's the part where I want to talk about how all these things fit together. And you probably noticed a recurring theme. Telling people that their baby is ugly is really tough. Doing so in a way that doesn't alienate or belittle is even tougher. But I do have some strategies to help you out with that. There are things that you can do to make it a little easier. We start by saying thanks at every opportunity. Saying thank you for submitting this pull request can be remarkably disarming. It puts people at ease. Saying thank you for this. I appreciate it. I want you to know that I appreciate your work. Thank you. That in and of itself can really help because you're about to tell them that their baby is ugly. but you want them to know that you don't mean it meanly. You don't want to be a jerk. I'm not a jerk. I'm not trying to be a jerk. I'm trying to help you improve, and I appreciate the work that you have done. Simply, just, easy. These words seem innocuous, but consider, again, a lot of people who are contributing code are not programmers. They didn't start with a CS degree. They don't have that experience. So by saying, oh, you can just use a simple hash here instead, maybe they don't know what a hash is. Maybe it's not so simple. Maybe it's not so easy. By removing these words from our vocabulary and starting out with the premise that they are smart people who just need help learning the new thing, we give them that hand-holding and that nurturing that brings them out. And if we start with, thank you. Pardon me. If we start with thank you, I appreciate the work that you have done. Now you can use a hash here instead. That softens the blow. We can be a little more blunt in our code review and not have to worry so hard about alienating through the code review. By using more inclusive language, more happy words. Just use happy words. Everyone loves happy words. Smileys help a lot too, because remember that the internet has no tone. There is no tone of voice in written communication. And in general, several studies have shown that people find more negativity in written communication than in spoken word. So assume that everyone is going to be biased towards thinking you're a jerk, because that's just the way the human brain works. I don't know why, but that's how it is. Using smileys is disarming. It says, thank you for the pull request. This little piece right here kind of sucks. Fix it, please. Smiley. So liberal use of smileys can take something that might be considered rude and turn it into, let's work together. They're always going to have haters. You're always going to have people who don't like your system. They're going to tell you that your system sucks. You should just change your name to Cute Dogs. But why are you so mad? Well, you give every dog 11s and 12s. It doesn't even make any sense. They're good dogs, Brent. They're good pull requests. It's good code. It might not seem that way to you, but they're good dogs. So the first thing we can do to help get this all together and make the world a better place is to show up. Johnny Christmas did a couple of great talks last year called IRL Networking for Humans. I highly recommend them. Basically, his premise was that you don't get networking done by sitting on the couch. You don't meet those new friends that used to be strangers by staying at home. For all of this to work, for InfoSec and open source InfoSec tools to improve, we have to work together. If we want to make great software, we have to be A, great developers, and B, just friendly people. Both of those things are important. In part, showing up means coming to things like LASCON. So congratulations. All of you have shown up. Great job. You didn't get too hungover. The next step is talking to people, doing the networking, shaking the hands, handing out the business cards. The point of all of that is finding out what everyone else is working on. Find out where our efforts can be combined, where we can save work by working together, how we can help each other. And that brings us to the next thing. Get involved. Contribute to open source. Even if it's just fixing typos. If it's making some line of output more clear to the user. Those things help. People will appreciate it. And the more you do it, the easier it will get. Having your own open source project and maintaining it and accepting pull requests from other people can be highly rewarding. Submitting pull requests to other people can also be very highly rewarding. It's usually worth the effort. The world is not going to get better on its own. Networks and code are not going to become more secure by themselves. We have to do it. It takes our effort. But before that, before we can work together, we have to know each other. We have to be friends. So go to security meetups. Go to non-security developer meetups. Go to IT meetups. Meet people. Meet the people in your area, make them your friends. Make them your allies against the problem. And overall, be nice. Just, please, be nice. No one wants to be friends with a jerk. Likewise, if you're a jerk, no one wants to hang out with you. Don't do that. No one likes to be treated poorly. Linux kernel development has lost several very highly productive, enthusiastic contributors and untold numbers of potential contributors because of the extreme assholishness of Linus Torvalds. The guy's a jerk. He's mean. He's just mean. Other projects have lost people for similar reasons. Make sure that's not your project. None of this is to say that you can't be critical. Telling people their baby is ugly is tough, and doing so tactfully as possible and showing them the way to make their baby healthy, to make it happy, to make their baby eventually beautiful. That turns them into your friends. It helps you build meaningful partnerships with those people. And once you have those partnerships, once you have those relationships, then lots of things become easier. Because they're good dogs, Brent. Any questions?